Good morning, everyone. I hope your day has already started off fantastic. I'm going to do a video here talking about polls and the Canadian election, which is bound to be called and bound to happen very shortly. And I want to take a snapshot of how things stand before the election begins, okay? Now, following individual polls is a little tricky. And of course, what happens is people with different ideologies seek out different polls that make them feel good. And I'm not going to pass any judgment on whether this is a good or accurate poll, but it is a new poll from a nonprofit Angus Reid Institute finds the governing Liberal Party, led by newly sworn-in Prime Minister Mark Carney, is surging to a 5-point lead. And this is the summarize the result. And you can see on this graph how the Conservatives are in blue, the Liberals are in red, the NDP are in orange, the Bloc Québécois are in the lighter blue, and the Green Party in green, and then other in gray. And if you go back to just before Christmas, guys, these numbers were 45% for the Conservatives, 21% for the NDP. Second, the Liberals were third at 16%, barely above the Bloc Québécois. Conservatives really wanted an election to be called, and the NDP just wouldn't do it. They would not vote non-confidence, but the Liberals trailing and down and out and crushed. At that time, the leader, Justin Trudeau, said, "This is a disaster. I have to resign." And he closed Parliament. The Liberals had a leadership race, and they elected a new leader who is now our Prime Minister, a new leader, and he's right above me here. It's Mark Carney, and this guy's Pierre Poilievre above me. And since they elected this new leader, you look at, just track the polls now up to March 25th. How could it be March 17th, I'm sorry. And it has the Liberals at 42, the Conservatives at 37, the NDP getting crushed. This poll looks devastating for the NDP, devastating for the Conservatives, and very positive for the Liberals. But I'm not going to pass judgment on what, is this accurate? Is this real? Who's been polled? Is this a poll of 25 people? Is it a poll of 3,000 people? What's the margin of error? I searched this whole article from top to bottom, and there's a lot in here, and I cannot find any information on who was this all polled in Quebec? Was this all polled in Alberta? Was this all polled in Ontario? Was it 50 people? Was it 1,000 people? What's the margin of error? I just don't know, right? So how can you take something like this completely seriously? So let me show you another website that I think is a really good summary that you can maybe use yourself, or I will probably do a weekly update once the election gets going here to keep you up to date on what's happening with the Canadian election. Let me show you this other website. Funny enough, guys, it's the poll tracker from CBC News, which is a government-funded news organization. And before you roll your eyes, let me show you why I think there's some really good information on this website. So they just share information here. They give you a weighted average of many polls, and then they show you individual poll results. And they have a methodology on their what they call their moving average of many polls, how the polls are weighted. Let me just quickly read this. One of the reasons I like looking at the information here is the vote projection model averages publicly available opinion polls of decided and leaning voters that meet CBC standards. Only polls commissioned by media outlets or independently self-commissioned by polling firms are included in the aggregate. Polls commissioned by political parties, interest groups, or advocacy organizations are excluded. Polls are weighted by their age and sample size, as well as by the track record and past performance of the polling firm. They also do something in their rolling average graph depiction here. They calculate the pollster track record, and the way they do that is they take the polling firms. They are weighted by their track record of accuracy over the past 10 years. Here's their final graph, and this graph is an average of many different polls throughout time with a rear weighted trailing average, okay? And it's very good for seeing the trend. So in this section, they show you all the individual polls, okay? And they've got information up till March 15th now, so it does not include the poll that we just talked about, the Angus Reid poll, but it tells you what it is: the Ecos, Abacus, Main Street Research, Ecos again, all the different polling companies, and the results, the numbers. Okay, and we can show earlier results here. You can show results as far back as you like, but here's a poll that was conducted between December 14th and January 10th, 2025 by Nanos Research, and it corroborates what we saw in the previous graph, where the Conservatives in this color here were at 48% or 47%. The Liberals were at 20%. The NDP was at 18%. Very close numbers there, and you can track individual polls, and they show you results over time. Now, this graph is a little bit different than the previous graph because it's not just one snapshot. As I mentioned, it's an average of all the polls, and it's using a weighted trailing average. So if one new poll comes out that shows a very different number, it still averages the polls that were conducted earlier. And as time moves along, it's using a weighted average, weighing the most recent polls more highly and the more distant polls less. So it's kind of smoothing the results. It's a mathematical way of smoothing the results. And then they also add their those things I mentioned, like the typical accuracy of the poll. There's a weighting for the different poll. It puts all of that into a formula, and it gives you a graph like this. And I find this is really good for seeing the trends. It's not super good for seeing the final number, where we exactly are today, okay, because that is a specific snapshot, but this gives a very good, smooth graphical illustration of how the trends are going. So this graph here starts at 2021, back here in October 2021, and you can look how these numbers have changed over the years, all the way to January here. If we go to, or December 23rd, just before Christmas, that's where we were. Conservatives 44, Liberal 20.9, NDP 19, Bloc 7. And then look what's happened since the Liberals have changed leaders. This is an average of all polls that fit their criteria. And look what's happened here. This is where they end right now. The Liberals and the Conservatives converging, the NDP dropping, even the Bloc here, which is a party that only runs candidates in Quebec, is also dropping. It's going to make for a very interesting election. They show you more things here. This is the polling averages. You can click here, and based on those numbers, it gives you the seat projections. These are called ridings in Canada. What would be the seat projection based on these numbers? And it shows you the graph here, and you can see that in December, it projected Conservatives with between 205 and 241 seats, and the Liberals crushed down to 33 to 64 seats. But now it's a neck and neck race. It's predicting Conservatives between 135 and 178 seats, and Liberals between 120 and 172 seats. The NDP completely crushed at 6 to 16 seats. And you're probably thinking, how could the Bloc be higher than the NDP? When you go back here in the polling, the NDP is polling higher on popular vote. Well, the Bloc only runs in Quebec. The NDP, this number is nationally, so their votes are spread out across the whole country, whereas the Bloc votes are all congregated in Quebec. It also gives you a probability of winning. I like this too, because for the longest time, the probability of winning was 99% Conservative, 1% Liberal. And just since Christmas, now, what is it saying? 60-40. Okay? It also breaks it down by region in Canada. British Columbia, let's just look at the numbers here. British Columbia is, the Liberals have surpassed the NDP and converging with the Conservatives. Let's look at Alberta, which is a heavily Conservative province, and you can see the Liberals are trending up, the Conservatives are trending down, but the Conservatives still well ahead in Alberta. Saskatchewan and Manitoba, similar picture. The Conservatives still ahead in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The Liberals trending up above the NDP. In Ontario, now this one, because the ones I've just showed you, British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, combined, probably don't have as many seats as Ontario. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but Ontario, by far the most populated province and has the most seats. And look what's happening in Ontario. The Liberals are going straight up. The NDP is going straight down. And the Conservatives are trending down as well. And this is really significant. This is hugely significant. I know this from experience. the NDP dropping here in Ontario is huge because there's a lot of seats in the Toronto area, the GTA it's called, that are neck and neck Liberal NDP. And if the NDP has a strong election, this is where they pick up a lot of seats. They win those ridings where it's close, Liberal NDP. And when they start dropping like this in Ontario, a lot of those very close seats, the Liberals could win those seats, and that's going to translate into a big bump for the Liberals in the Toronto area. In Quebec, just an astonishing graph. The light blue is the Bloc Québécois, and they typically poll along the top in the province. They consistently get 25 to 35% of the popular vote. And you can see here back in, let's go to December, what was the Bloc here was at 36%. The Conservatives were at 22, the Liberals at 23. The Bloc was going to win majority of the seats in Quebec. But look what's happened. The Liberals have jumped over the Conservatives and actually surpassed the Bloc. In the latest poll, they have the Liberals at 33. The Bloc has dropped to 28 and the Conservatives to 23. The NDP has also dropped. This is huge as well, because Quebec is the second most populated province in Canada and has the second most seats. These videos are not about giving opinion, just presenting the data. So I wanted to say something smart about the French peoples, but I cannot, okay? Atlantic Canada, same story. It seems like east of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the Liberals are surging. Straight line up, Conservatives straight line down. Now, I should point out that when you look at these graphs with the trailing averages, right? When you look at this number, the last number here, Conservatives 35, Liberals 45, that includes previous polls where the Conservatives were doing better and the Liberals were doing worse. They're included in the average. So reality at this particular moment is worse than that for the Conservatives and better than that for the Liberals. Do you hear what I'm saying? That's how math works. This graph is including trailing average, an average of all polls through time. It smooths out the results. But it also, you have to understand, if you take the latest poll and you go back to the individual poll here, the last one they have updated here is March 13th to March 15th, and it's a liaison strategies poll. And these acronyms here give you information of description of terms. If we just click that, it's very good. It tells you the method, how the poll was conducted. So TEL means it's a telephone poll. IVR means it's a interactive voice response poll. NET is an internet poll, and a TNI is a hybrid poll. And they know that the errors for these different kind of polls are different, and they weight them differently. They use a very complicated formula. But just to look at the last poll that they had, this March 13th to 15th, they got the Liberals at 38%. They got the Conservatives at 35%. So they actually have the Liberals above the Conservatives, ahead of the Conservatives, and the NDP at 12%. So what I'm trying to say is that the individual polls taken right now, many of them show the Liberals leading. But when you look at the total Canada poll and you average all of those and you include a trailing average, this graph for all of Canada, popular vote, is showing the Liberals converging with the Conservatives. So this one's showing you the trend. The individual polls that are done most recently are showing you the actual numbers. The other thing that's really good about this website is that they break it down like this per province, and they tell you how many seats are in each province. So they give you kind of a summary. British Columbia has 43 seats. Saskatchewan and Manitoba, they can show you the numbers here. The Conservatives leading. This is on the average, right? They're using the averager. 28 seats in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Quebec, with the Liberals leading now, and Quebec has 78 seats. Alberta has 37 seats, and they have the Conservatives way out in front. Ontario, which the most recent individual polls show the Liberals leading, but the average with the trailing polls averaged in show the Conservatives slightly ahead of the Liberals. The Ontario has 122 seats, and then Atlantic Canada with their 32 seats, with the Liberals leading. So basically, guys, this is a very good source of information, and if you want to peruse them and look at these things, you can they have seat projections per province, polling average. They got a lot of very interesting things on this website. So I'll link the website in the video description. Maybe I'll do a video once a week to show you how things are changing as the election campaign and the election gets closer. But I'll tell you one thing right now, and this is not an opinion, this is just a fact. I'm going to try and keep opinion out of my videos here and just present information. But it is a fact that Ontario and Quebec is 122 plus 78. That works out to be exactly 200, doesn't it? 200 seats forms a majority. There are 334 seats in the House of Commons, I believe. Ontario and Quebec have 2/3 of the country's seats, approximately. And it's time and time and time again, the party that wins Ontario and Quebec wins Canada. So the big fight is going to be in Ontario and Quebec. The campaign is going to be fierce in these two provinces. And when you say Ontario, I think something like perhaps more than half of these seats are Toronto. And then Quebec, majority of the seats are Montreal. So you want to know who's going to win the election in Canada? You got to follow what's going on in Montreal and Toronto. Anyways, I thought I'd show you that, guys. Let me know in the comment section if you appreciate a video like this and whether you think I should maybe do one every week once the election is officially called, and you can follow along. But we will consider this the starting point. We're going to pick this as the starting point. Christmas, December 23rd. Was the starting point. Everyone knew there was going to be an election. All parties were ready to defeat the ruling government, the Liberal government, with a non-confidence vote. The Liberals shut down Parliament and chose a new leader. This all started happening at Christmas, and that's the starting point. Conservatives 44%, Liberals 20.9%, NDP 19%, Bloc 7.8%. That's where it started. Where are we going to end up? I'll catch you guys on the next one.